I don't know if you saw the video where I was picking up knitting again for the first time after like 7 or 8 years. I don't know how long it's been. I was never an excellent knitter to begin with, but I never found knitting difficult. And then I tried to make this and ended up with this. I quickly realized that the problem was I could not recognize the stitches on the needles. Like, I couldn't tell a knit stitch from a slip stitch from a purled stitch. I just didn't know what I had on the needle. So I was making a bunch of mistakes. And then I was using the needles that were my favorite, which are these Chow Goos. So what I decided to do was to go back to how I learned to knit in the first place, because I never remember knitting being a challenge. Like, it was easy to do. There was only 2 stitches, and then you just followed a combination of those 2 stitches in whatever pattern that it was. So why was I having so much trouble? It was frustrating. So if you're like me and you haven't knitted in a while and don't remember how, or if you're just learning, this is how I learned the first time. So I threw out my Chow Goos that I kept slipping stitches off of accidentally. And yeah, I know knitters are going to go crazy when I tell them this, but I went back to these, and this is what I learned on. And I remember at some point when I found Chow Goo, deciding these were absolute trash. The biggest surprise here is that I loved these needles by the time I was done with this scarf. This was some leftover yarn from this cardigan that I made, which is crochet, by the way. And I never really intended to stop knitting. I just picked, okay, I want to make a scarf. So then I'd go look at YouTube of all the scarf tutorials, and I'd either find a knit one or a crochet one that I wanted to do. And just most of them happened to be crochet that I chose. So here's what I did. I started with these old school wooden needles and some chunky yarn, because that's how I started how many ever years ago that I learned. And I did use circulars, which I didn't do the first time, but I just used them as normal needles, and that way I knew that I was not going to slip the stuff off of the edge of the needles, because I don't remember how to put them back on properly. I just don't. And then this is just a sea of knit stitch. Knit one way, knit the other, knit one way, knit the other. And it was, I'm not gonna lie, I frogged it 3 or 4 times at the beginning, getting the tension right on my cast on, which cast on for some reason came back to my memory very easily. I didn't have to go watch a video on how to cast on. Like, the cast on, which is like one of the least stitches that you do, came back naturally. It was the rest of it that was like, what the crap. So I did a sea of knit stitch, and by the time I was done with this scarf, which is really cute, by the way, I like it, these needles were super smooth. Like, I guess the friction from the yarn sort of sanded them, and they were super smooth, and it was going like really easy. Like, by the time I finished this first thing, knit stitch was, I could do it in my sleep with my eyes closed, and I was recognizing the stitches on the needles, you know, all the good. So then this is my next project. I just took some normal weight yarn instead of chunky yarn, and I again went with these old wooden needles that I had decided I didn't like anymore, and thrown in a very old like makeup case and left there. But this one is just some sparkle yarn, and I'm doing all purl stitches instead of all knit stitches. So hopefully by the time I get done with this thing, I will feel very confident in purl stitches, and I'll be able to recognize a purl stitch, and I'll know which way they're on the needle. And then if they fall off the edge, I can put them back on without any problem and be more confident in what happens when your knitting comes off your needle. I don't know. That's just my thought, is that if I make a all knit scarf and then I make an all purl scarf in these garter stitches, that I'll have a little bit better understanding of what I'm looking at when I'm knitting. And then the next one after this will be knit 1, purl 1, or maybe knit 2, purl 2, which I think I did like a ribbed scarf was my next project after that. So I'm just going to repeat the projects that I did that taught me how to knit the first time. We'll see how it goes. But at least I have one thing that I've knitted recently back under my belt, right? So that's a win-ish.